The Marksman class may very well be the most difficult archetype to design new champions for. It is by far the most conspicuous design constraints of any category in light of needing to check a lot more boxes to qualify as a member of the class. Yet there aren't a whole lot of ways in which you can go about it without pushing the envelope on what's acceptable for an ADC to have. That's why modern releases have been known to cause problems for being a bit too capable or too privileged, quote-unquote. Samira, Smolder, Kai'Sa, Zeri, Senna, Aphelios, Akshan. Not a very fastidious track record for any of them to say the least. But that's just because you can only design a ranged, squishy, crit-scaling physical DPS champion in so many ways before you have to break boundaries. So in general, people tend to get nervous when a new marksman's brought in since they'll often have some kind of crazy gimmick that makes them a nightmare to bounce. Does the same apply to our newest addition to the roster, Yunara though? Scheduled to release in version 15.4 by my estimate, I wanted to take a deep dive into her gameplay and abilities to find out how well designed she was. So without further ado, for our next installment of 200 Years Are Well Designed, we'll be discussing Yunara. Even though marksmen are generally known to be high physical damage dealers, a number of them have been known to be capable of dishing out magic damage to an extent. Zeri, Kai'Sa, Kog'Maw, Vars, and so on. In this day and age, it's also not uncommon to encounter the occasional AP carry like Quay, Mel, Ziggs, or Seraphine. For the most part though, if they're a marksman, they're still required to meet certain conditions, chief among them being they have to output a steady stream of damage, often resulting in magic damage ADCs to be very on-hit focused, as trying to do so through abilities kind of just turns them into a mage. Seeing as Riot's kind of had their fill with unconventional marksmen in recent times, one with the three most recent bot laners being Smolder, Zeri, and Samira, they've decided to go back to a more traditional AD carry, someone who plays in a more straightforward manner. Of course, they still have to give the new champion a gimmick of some sort to distinguish them from their peers, and the one they decided to go for is magic damage, frankly, in a more mellow fashion than I thought. Let's cut right to the chase and talk about her passive, Vow of the First Glance. No, your eyes don't deceive you, she indeed has one sentence for her passive, reminiscent of an old school champion. All of her critical strikes do bonus magic damage. Rejoice, my friends, Rito finally gave us an easy passive to read. Real talk though, there is something to point out about this one sentence. While I understand there's more to her kit than just her passive, you may have noticed that, applicably speaking, Yunara has no passive in the early game. Until you purchase any semblance of crit, she's unable to make use of her passive whatsoever. Further, the extra damage is based on a flat amount plus an AP scaling, and while that's not unusual to come across, the fact that it's contingent on critical strikes makes an item like Nashor's Tooth unable to facilitate this, and at present, we don't have any ability power crit chance items. Although to be fair, critical hits already sting, especially with IE. Anything more than 10% bonus magic damage would only add more insult to injury when you account for the fact that it will be affected by crit damage modifiers like the aforementioned Infinity Edge. But regardless, we'll continue on with the rest of her kit. Normally, I go through abilities in order from passive to ultimate, but we're actually going to talk about her ultimate first as it governs the rest of her abilities. Transcend Oneself has Yunara gain a 15-second buff that automatically activates her Q and upgrades the rest of her abilities. That's it. Unlike other steroid ultimates, this one does not give you anything except a change in abilities. To see how it affects her basic repertoire though, we'll go into her Q. Cultivation of Spirit has a passive, aha, there it is. Well, yes, but not really. There are two parts to it. One, she does bonus magic damage on hit, so that's where the incentive to actually build Nashor's Tooth might be. She can do both on-hit magic damage and critical strike enhanced magic damage. 2. Attacks on enemies generate a stack up to a cap of 8, and when she has 8, she can actually activate her Q. This may sound familiar to a Q on another champion, that's because it's almost a carbon copy of Ashe's Q, Ranger's Focus, where after attacking a few times, she gets an attack speed boost and empowered auto attacks. In the case of Yunara, activating her Q also gets her a burst of attack speed, and she does even more on-hit magic damage while splashing 30% of that damage to nearby enemies. Keep in mind, numbers are always subject to change between PvE and live release, but essentially you can think of it as the mixture between Ashe's Q and Volibear's passive, where attacks connect to nearby enemies. The ability description makes it a lot more intimidating than it honestly is. A lot of it is just explaining how the spread attacks work. For the most part, passively she does on-hit magic damage, not unlike how Kai'Sa and Vars do. And then you have to ramp up her Q by attacking 8 times or 4 if they're a champion, then park her Q and go to town before having to restack again. It is quite literally Ranger's Focus but with a different empowerment. During Yunara's ultimate, her Q is active for the entire duration, effectively extending her Q attack speed and splash damage buff to 15 seconds. The benefit of this is that Yunara can participate in a team fight without having to stack her Q up prior. That was the main downside of Cultivation of Spirit. You can't just sit on 8 stacks of Unleash until you need it, as you can only have her ready for 6 seconds. Considering how fast a team fight can break out, you need a way to go from 0 to 100 immediately. Yunara's ultimate not only gives that to her, but lets her fight for an extended period of time, which is ideal for mid to late game team fights. Now, regarding the splash damage, this is arguably the most threatening I've seen because as you can see by the footage, Yunara could strike a person in front of her and it could even bounce to targets behind her if they're close enough to the point of origin. Against Twitch, you want to not get lined up by him, and against Jinx, you just need to not be right next to each other, but Yunara seems to have a lot more potential area coverage given the apparent absence of a target cap. If there are 5,000 minions right next to each other, then she can hit all 5,000 of them, and I'm sure runas can also extend her effective coverage. Vandurl, if you watch my videos, you got your next wet dream episode. This can make her a very powerful skirmisher like in 2v2s or 3v3s. I'm cool with it, very simple to understand and has a clear purpose. Moving on to our W though, we have Arc of Judgment, a little spinny thing that travels in a straight line, stopping at the first enemy hit and slowly passing through them before continuing to the endpoint and exploding for a bit of damage, kind of like how MLZ creates a ring of repeated damage at the end of its instance. Easiest way to describe this ability, it behaves in a similar fashion to Echo's Time Winder, where it slows down if it strikes a champion earlier than the full distance and slowly continues forward. But in Yunara's case, Arc of Judgment will always travel to the endpoint no matter how long it takes, so the entire time her W is attacking something, it will deal more damage than if it were to just travel to the end and explode. However, this also means a person could stand in front of the attack and face tank it to buy someone behind them time to step aside. It isn't like other penetrating projectiles that travel at the same speed. Though it can go through targets, it slows down, giving opponents the option to body block it quote-unquote. Going on a tangent for a moment, I love the design of this movie. It looks like a standard straight-line projectile that damages enemies on the way and explodes at the endpoint. Your garden variety utility control spell you find on most ADCs, Jinx W, Smolder W, Zeri W, what have you. But whenever it collides with an enemy, it slows down, repeatedly damaging them before returning to its normal speed after running through them. There's also an incentive to get the hell away from it if it's touching you due to rapidly dealing damage during that time, which in turn gives Yunara fantastic synergy with any champion who can lock enemies down, forcing them to take the maximum duration of the attack. Definitely a cool spin, no pun intended, on the penetrating straight line projectile idea. Sadly, I can't really say the same for her ultimate W, Arc of Ruin, which is just a laser in a straight line damaging all enemies in the way for a mixture of physical and magic damage and having a big slow. You can think of it like Aurora's E but without the jump back, a long straight line damaging spell that slows all targets. It's more practical, yes, but experientially I like the fidget spinner W more. Something worth pointing out is that Arc of Ruin counts as an ultimate ability, meaning it can benefit from Axiom Arcanist. I'm not really sure how broken a big 99% decaying slow would be on an ability with a 5-second cooldown. Seems kind of overpowered for a 100% AD ratio and 150 AP. I can see the damage of this thing getting nerfed if you're allowed to spam it a lot. Onto Yunara's E, Kanmei's Steps. At base, she gets a burst of speed for a short duration. Basically Kai'Sa's supercharge without the attack speed bonus at the end of it. By the way, did you notice something? Her E is also one sentence. Pinch me, I must be dreaming. This might be the most rudimentary kit I've seen in literally years. There really isn't much else to say about her base E, it's just a tempo boost which can be good for repositioning in a fight. When activating her ultimate though, Yunara's E becomes Untouchable Shadow, resetting the cooldown if it's on cooldown, and instead of a burst of speed, it's a short dash. But it does nothing else. The dash can go over walls and stuff, but considering Yunara only has access to this when committing to her ultimate, I'm perfectly fine with that. A 6-second cooldown is very short, but I'd wager her overall mobility throughout the course of a game will be less than that of Lucian, Ezreal, Graves, and whatnot. I would truthfully still consider champions like Vayne and Kindred to have way more mobility on her than average. Yunara does get a boost of speed with her E at base, but in practice, she is regarded as an immobile champion, and even after getting her hands on a dash, she'll be about as quick to step around as a Lucian at most. Yunara is easily the most straightforward champion Riot came up with in a long time, and honestly the most inoffensive too. She reminds me of an old school marksman, a DPS tool, a utility control tool, maybe an escape or a dash, and then a buff. Her ultimate empowered state doesn't even give her any special steroid, and the ability transformations are far from an issue. It's not like Asante where he goes Super Saiyan after using his ultimate. Something else to make note of is how Yunara has no % health or true damage or built-in armor penetration or anything of the sort. She does hybrid damage, and the way she scales might make you think she runs the risk of becoming another Zeri or Kai'Sa where you can build 100 different items on her, but compared to Zeri and Kai'Sa, there's only so much you can do with Yunara's gameplay. She'll just be auto-attacking throughout most of a fight, occasionally throwing her W to slow down enemies and repositioning whenever she gets attacked. That's it. I literally can't aspel a Doom post about her even if I tried. That is her entire gameplay. Her rotation is popping her ultimate, throwing W to blast enemies, then just shooting anything that moves. Yunara honestly has less moving parts than even Jinx and Caitlyn, who are as simple as they come. Now that isn't to say Yunara can't deal her fair share of damage, cause no, she most certainly can. As a reminder, she does magic damage on hit and can critical strike for magic damage too, making her somewhat difficult to itemize against, although in her defense, not as tough as % health or true damage. Her Q has a more generous AoE coverage than most other splash attacks, and assuming Runon's Hurricane procs the same way it does for Jinx and Twitch, she can shred through entire enemy teams in the mid to late game, but that's really all she can do. She's a high DPS, low defense and utility champion. She'll blow up enemies after she gets 3 or 4 items, but considering she doesn't have any bullshit like destroying projectiles, or stealth, or untargetability, or 5000 AD by existing, or her entire kit resetting after killing someone, there's really not much to nitpick about. Respectful, that's the word I would use. She's the most respectful champion I've seen in a very long time. If there is one thing I could perhaps touch on, I think Yunara's way too reliant on her ultimate. Until 2 or more items, her passive might as well just be flavor text. True, she has passive on-hit damage on her Q which can fill in for her passive, but balancing aside, she feels really underwhelming without her ultimate. Of course, when Yunara has her ultimate on deck, she might be able to out-DPS even Twitch with his ultimate due to spray and pray lasting only 5 seconds compared to 15? All the same though, I can imagine her reliance on it to be a bit suffocating. As far as scaling is concerned, while her damage will be very high, she doesn't have the superior range of Jinx or Twitch, nor the tank shredding of Kog'Maw or Vayne. So I'm gonna tentatively put her strongest point at around 3 items, enough to get her DPS going but not too late in the game where champions start to get pretty bulky. Again, first impressions, take them with a grain of salt. I just think without her ultimate, Yunara's Q, W, and E can feel pretty weak in concept. Outside of the slow on her W, she doesn't really have any utility to speak of in her kit. I feel like Draven and Lucian could bully her in lane pretty easily, while Ashe and Ezreal can out-neutral her. Though there is a bright spot. Yunara's pushing power is insane. Even early game, her Q has to be one of the best lane shoving tools I've ever seen, especially for how cheap the mana cost is, close to non-existent, which can offset her vulnerability in lane. All in all, I think Yunara is a champion who is given just enough to make an impact in a game and really take you far if your mechanics and split-second decision-making are up to snuff, but she's entirely without any guarantee of value abilities in the realm of like Samira W, Neela W, Xayah Ultimate, Zivir Spell Shield, what have you, meaning it comes down entirely to how good you are at playing ADC. She reminds me of Lucian, a battle marksman who flies really close to the sun, but can output considerable damage if played correctly. What more can I say? The most delightful kit I've seen in a while for how mild it is. Getting her to a healthy state will mostly come down to numbers adjustments, but after that, I can see her being a welcome addition to bot lane. I think this might be the most optimistic champion first impressions video I've ever done since our first episode on Vex. Not that we haven't had other well-made champions during that time, I enjoyed Milio a fair bit, but from what I've observed in the community, the overwhelming majority approve of her simplistic yet effective design. I can't really find anything wrong with her other than the fact that after all the whiplash of 200 years we've had in the past decade, people might think Yunara's boring. I'm not sure about that, she looks like she can be pretty fun to play. What do you guys think about Yunara though? Do you find her a breath of fresh air, or can you spot any hidden problems about her that could complicate things? Let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today though, so if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other champion first impressions videos if you haven't yet. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in the next one. Take care.